The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's Dev Talk. We have Chris Kenley with us, and he is going to be talking about our developer topic for today. Chris, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So like Mark said, my name is Chris Kenley. I am a software engineer here at Zebra, and I work in the specialty printing group. And one of the main focuses of the specialty printing group is to develop new features and to maintain the application that I'm going to be talking about today, which is PPME. More specifically, the new features that just dropped in our recent release, which is PPME 3.1. So what am I going to be talking about? First of all, I realize there may be some people who are maybe unfamiliar with PPME, or maybe it's been a while. So I'll kind of give a background on the application and maybe talk a little bit about how it works. After that, we can talk about what we all came for, which is the PPME 3.1 new features. I'll kind of talk about the motivation behind the updates and kind of the general theme behind them. After that, we can jump right into the individual features, and I have some demos ready to go for these features. So we've got the setup wizard, which is our new guided installer. You have the reclaim printer feature, which is kind of a nice quality of life update that I'm sure many developers will be interested in. We have the auto tagging feature, which kind of builds upon our current tagging functionality, which I will get into if you're unfamiliar with tagging. And we also have our automated wireless certificate management, which that may be our most complicated feature that kind of utilizes everything that I'm going to be talking about. So I'll try to go into some detail when it comes to that feature. And then finally, I will mention our support of ZC card printers for the first time in PPME. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. What is PPME? If you want to say the whole mouthful, it's known as Printer Profile Manager Enterprise. And as you might gather from the name, this application targets enterprise-sized customers who might have large amounts of printers. And as you can see on the right, we have some big names currently using the application, and they're kind of large companies that you would expect to own a large amount of Zebra printers. And what PPME does for them is it gives them a nice centralized location to manage all their printers from. It's a web-based interface. So hopefully it provides a lot of convenience for those customers that need to manage a large amount of printers. So how does it work? The main thing that drives Profile Manager is the way it works with our printers that have Link-OS firmware. Maybe you've heard of Link-OS firmware. Basically, the thing that allows it to work is the use of WebSockets. And so the communication between PPME and our printers always occurs over the WebSockets. And what that gives us is basically a bidirectional communication channel. And so what that means is that we can receive data from our printers at any time, as opposed to, say, an HTTP request response model where you receive a response for every request. We would need to keep constantly requesting the status of our printers if we were using that. By using WebSockets, we're able to get unsolicited data from all of our printers at any given time. It allows us to keep an eye on all of our printers and basically manage many at once. So some of the main existing features of Profile Manager that you might already know if you've used the application is profiles, tagging, and provisioning. So this is the core features of PPME that make it work. So profiles are basically, a profile would be a snapshot of a printer that contains all of its settings and describes all of the objects that should be on that printer. And what we can do with that profile is then send it down to large amount of printers. So imagine a customer with 50 QLN220 printers who want to have them all using the same settings and having the same objects. In that case, the profile would be very useful for them. Right along those lines is the ability to tag printers, and it's kind of is what it sounds like. You're able to create subgroups of printers that can be managed independently. So imagine a customer has 50 printers and they would like to manage only 10 of those printers for a certain setting. By using tags, you could create a tag, apply it to 10 printers, and any task that could be applied to a single printer could also be applied to a tag, meaning those 10 printers. So building upon those two features is also provisioning. And provisioning is kind of a more advanced feature of Profile Manager. What it allows a customer to do is create scheduled tasks. So basically, any action that could be applied to a single printer or a tag could be made into a scheduled task. So say you want something to happen every time a printer comes online, every week, every month. Those are all possibilities when using provisioning. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of how the application works, and I'll be doing some demos of the new features that maybe will give you a better idea of how these features also work. I've included a link at the bottom of this slide. I believe the slides will be going out after this talk, so you'll be able to follow the link from there. Otherwise, you can also just Google it. But this will take you to our homepage for Profile Manager. There you can find a readily available cloud demo with some connected printers that you can poke around in. Or also you can download our full-fledged installer and evaluate the application for 30 days. At which point you would have to purchase a license key because that's how we sell copies of the application. So the updates, PPME 3.1 and the LinkOS firmware kind of go hand in hand with this major release. And the major focus of this release is security. And so the motivation behind these updates kind of came out of our security group, who are constantly meeting to evaluate our printers and our applications to make sure we're doing the right things. Believe it or not, there are people out there who are trying to hack our Zebra printers, and we need to stay ahead of those people. Not to mention that if you're using out-of-date security practices, it's not exactly the best look if you're trying to sell applications. So what has come out of that group is that we are using SHA-1 certificates, and that has been identified as a security priority. So in case you don't know what SHA-1 or SHA-2 certificates are, it is a cryptographic hashing algorithm, and it goes into creating certificates. SHA-1 has typically been in widespread use. The first attacks against it came out probably like 10 years ago, but they've consistently been getting better and more efficient. So at this point, many security organizations are recommending an upgrade to SHA-2, which is exactly what we're doing, in addition to other things that revolve around SHA-2 certificates. So I know our firmware, LinkOS 5.0, began its SHA-2 support, and eventually, I believe our firmware plans to deprecate the use of SHA-1 completely, but that date has not been set yet because we still need to support our customers who are slow to upgrade firmware. There's always a couple. As far as PPME itself and its use of SHA-2 certificates, we've upgraded to use those certificates pretty much everywhere. Like I mentioned, we still need to support old firmware, so you have the option always of using SHA-1. But as you will see from some demos that I'm going to do, we pretty much recommend everywhere that the customer uses SHA-2 where possible. So we use SHA-2 in the WebSocket connections to the printers. We use SHA-2 certificates in the UI that you'll see through the browser, and also in the wireless certificate management solution that I will demo later. A major focus of the updates has been the ability to generate self-signed SHA-2 certificates for both the printers and the UI certificates at any time. So if you, for some reason, did not like your last set of certificates, you can just click a button, set a password, and your new certificates will be generated for you by PPME. If for some reason a customer doesn't trust PPME to generate for them, a customer may also generate their own certificates and upload it to the application, and those certificates would then be used in the printer connections and in the UI connections. So that gives you a great amount of flexibility, I think. As far as the LinkOS 6.0 updates, there's some features that enabled us to do some things, especially with the wireless certificate management, is now the ability for the printer to generate a certificate signing request. And this is important, and I will tell you why in a little bit. the thing that goes right along with that is the ability to place the printer's wireless certificate directly on the printer. So both of these features together on the firmware allow PPME to take a bigger role in managing the certs on the printers. So the first individual feature that I wanted to go over is our setup wizard, which is a new guided installer. I wanted to touch on this first because it kind of touches a little bit of everything in the application, even the certs. So I didn't want to spoil anything by doing any other features first. So what we currently use as an installer, if you downloaded our installer today, it's a scripted installer that's pretty similar to any application that you would download. It basically is a series of screens, a series of text boxes for you to enter in your configuration. The problem is we have customers with some pretty complicated network setups where the installer didn't quite meet their needs. And so what we would see is a lot of tech support calls into Zebra, basically to help get around some of their strange configurations. So what we've decided to do going forward is we have this new web-based guided installer. It's designed to be more user-friendly. A lot of the sections from our scripted installer will be moved to the setup wizard. And it also adds a lot more steps to give the customer guidance when it comes to points that maybe they're getting stuck at. And hopefully that will reduce the load on our tech support. That's kind of the goal. And so what the setup wizard will do and what I will demonstrate is the configuration of the initial admin user. It will configure the proxy server if you need to get around a firewall, licensing because that's how we sell the application, how printers connect to the local network, SMTP because the application needs to be able to send emails. And also we will take you through the generation of the WebSocket SHA-2 certificates. And we'll also demonstrate the ability to back up those settings and restoring of those settings. And before I demo the setup wizard, I just wanted to give a quick look at some of these screens, which will never be seen again. This would be the legacy installer pre 3.0. And you'll see some of the screens here like the EULA, certificate creation. This stuff will have been ported into the new setup wizard. So I was given some advice that doing a live demo is typically a bad idea. So what I've done is record myself going through the setup wizard, and I'll try to talk through what exactly is happening on the screen. So first of all, you see that we have our welcome screen of the setup wizard. This is what the application looks like as soon as you try to open it in a web page. So this basically just reminds you what PPME does. And you will see that right off the bat, we have detected that the customer has a bad network configuration. Not a bad network configuration, but potentially a firewall setup or something that's stopping them. We have at least two services here that we require being able to contact for the application to function. And that is our licensing server and also our certificate signing server. And the signing server would be the one that signs the SHA-1 certificates. So we do need this to support those old certificates. But like I said, this is necessary to continue forward. So we stop the customer at this point. What they can do is try to change their firewall configuration and test these connections as many times as they want. But you will not be able to proceed until this setup is complete. What we also allow you to do is configure a proxy server if that's the case. If you just want to go around your firewall. And so that's what we'll demonstrate here. This is just a local proxy, and you should be able to test your proxy settings. And if that's successful, we basically say, okay, everything's good. You don't need to enter in new proxy settings. And you can always change these later. I'll show that too. But now you're able to continue forward. And now what we have here is the initial admin user creation. This is something that was carried over from the scripted installer. Pretty straightforward. You can also view the EULA from this page, and you can read that if you want. If you're like me, you'll just close that and accept and continue. And this next page is not super important, but it's basically like for those customers that I've mentioned with possibly difficult network configurations. They may need to change this value. For most people, 99% of people, what we detect for your installation will be sufficient. So we'll move past this page. The next is to activate a license. If this is the first time installing on a certain machine, you will have 30 days to evaluate PPME. Otherwise, if you're like me, this is my dev machine, so I passed the trial period long ago. Luckily, I have plenty of licenses to enter. So if you had already purchased one, that's where you would enter it. And here we have another screen carried over from the scripted installer. This is just how your printers connect to the network. And here's a new screen where we configure the SMTP setup. We decided this was important enough to put in the setup wizard because the application needs to be able to send invites for new users and also password reset emails. And hopefully the setup wizard makes it pretty easy to test your setup and move on. And here's yet another carryover from the scripted installer. This is where we enter in our certificate details. So these certificate details will be used whenever PPME generates new SHA-2 certificates, which we'll be doing in the next couple screens. And the certificate details are used for both the printer and the UI connections. And so this is an interesting screen to point out because this is our basically the SHA-2 versus SHA-1 recommendation. You can configure one or both connections. It's up to you, but you can see that we basically strongly recommend customers have updated firmware and that they use the SHA-2 connection rather than the legacy SHA-1 connection. And you can see that it's up to you which one you want to use. Once we select that, we will be able to generate certificates. So on this page, you get a nice little marketing shout out, get some new features previewed here. But right now at this point, the only thing you can do from this page is pick the port that you want your printers to connect to and generate those certificates for the printer. So we're just going to keep the default, I believe, no reason to change it unless you are already using that port for something. And that'll take us to setting the password for those certificates since they're stored locally. And now we will generate the certs. You'll notice while those certs are being generated, we also create a settings file for manually connecting printers. And this is optional because usually you wouldn't need to use this. This is mainly something for troubleshooting. What this will do is just dump a file that you can send directly to port 9200 of your printer. And it's basically what would happen if you were adding a printer manually through the application. It'll give you some settings, the certs that you need, and it'll tell your printer to reset. So if you're having problems using the discovery feature, then that's something we would maybe ask you to do is use the manual settings file. So here is something new as well. Because we've just created all these configurations for your connections and your certificates, we now give you the option to back up those connections. And so if you choose to do this, it will basically create an encrypted file for you where all your settings are saved. And say you want to move your installation of the application to another machine, by backing up and restoring, you would not need to update certificates on printers or anything like that. Your printers would just connect to the new installation. So we've backed up our connection, and that's pretty much the last step of the setup wizard. So now that the installation process is done, we'll be taken directly to the Discover Printers page. And this is where a customer would normally search for their printers and just start to add them. What I really wanted to show off is the configuration page where a lot of the things that we just configured will show up. And if we want to change something, obviously we can do it here. So you'll see our SHA-2 connection that we've configured, the SHA-1 that we declined to configure, and some other connection details. Down below, you'll see that we have the option to even generate a new UI certificate if you really want to do that. And you can even change the port from 443 if for some reason you're using that port for something else. We generally recommend you install PPME on a clean machine though. And here you can see that we also have the SMTP settings and the proxy settings, as well as some other things that didn't need to go into the setup wizard. So that's it for the setup wizard. And on to the next feature. So this feature is called Reclaim Printer. And this is something you may encounter when adding printers that have already been added to a previous version of PPME, or maybe you're like me and you're generating a lot of new certificates. And if you're doing so, this situation would happen a lot. So basically the situation is these printers get stuck, and this can be due to incorrect configuration, such as both connections being pointed to the same URL, invalid or out-of-date certificates, which happens to me a lot, DNS resolution issues. So just to mention this, it's, you know, as a developer, it's a little frustrating because if you're constantly generating certificates to test that feature, your printers are constantly getting stuck in this state. Personally, I would have to have a terminal open with a lot of pre-baked settings ready to go to send to my printer every single time I generate new certificates. So what Reclaim Printer will do is a lot of the same things that just adding a printer will do, except it kind of wipes out all the relevant connections. So it will overwrite your WebSocket configuration. It will replace the previous certificates with what we know is the good cert. We will reset the printer and attempt to re-add it. So like I mentioned, this is a great feature for customers and developers because instead of having a terminal open with all your pre-baked settings ready to go, you can just do a couple of button clicks in the UI and it'll do that for you. And so this is something I will also demo here. And we can see that our printer is connected here, no problems. What I will show is the situation that happens when you decide to generate some new certificates. And this will also be a good opportunity to show off the generate certificates from the configuration menu. But by doing this, we create new certificates on the server, but the printer will no longer have the correct certificates. So as we go see our printer, and it's not actually telling us the truth right now. As soon as we go and try to talk to our printer, we'll see that we are unable to do that. This printer is offline. So at this point, there's not much the application can do except just tell it to forget about the printer. But that's not 100% true because we can always do a rediscovery and a re-add of that printer. Unfortunately, when we do our discovery, it doesn't appear in available printers because technically it has the correct configuration. It's just missing the certificates. So we'll see that the host name is correct there. So we'll just try to reclaim this printer. And so you'll see that this printer has been placed in adding state. And what we've done is, like I said, wiped out the settings, sent it new certs, and kicked it off the network to be re-added. And sometimes this takes a minute, so I'm just going to fast forward a bit so we can see the printer as it comes back online. And so you see everything is green. This printer has been successfully reclaimed. On to the next feature. Let's talk about auto tagging. So this is a feature that builds upon the tagging feature that we already have. I'm actually a little surprised that this feature has not been available until now because it's a very powerful feature when you're dealing with a large amount of printers, which is what PPME is for, obviously. So what auto tagging is going to do is if you create an auto tag configuration, what it's going to do is as printers come online, it's going to look for those printer settings, which are also known as SGD values. So if you see on the example on the right, what we're going to do is create a tag with the name very fast printers. We want to tag all of our printers that are set at maximum speed. So what we can tell this configuration to look for is the SGD media.speed and the value of 10. And because not all of our SGD values are number-based, some of them are string-based, so we give a lot of options for matching on a string, in addition to case sensitivity matching. And another part of this feature is also the ability to auto-remove tags, which will untag a printer whose setting no longer meets the criteria when it comes back online. And I'll demonstrate that as well in this demo. So what I'm about to show here is just that this printer setting of printer darkness is 4.0, and that's going to be the setting that we target when we auto tag. So the printer darkness SGD is known as print.tone, and that is what we will tell this configuration to look for. And we're going to leave case sensitivity and auto remove enabled because I wanted to demo auto remove as well. So with that configuration, all we really have to do is reconnect the printer. So we're just going to force that printer offline. And as printers come back online, that's the time that we request all of the printer settings, since it's a very expensive operation. And obviously with tagging, with this auto tag, we need to check every single setting. So that's why printer coming back online is the best time to check all of its settings. So I'm going to forward a little bit here because kicking a printer off and waiting for it to come back on sometimes takes a while. But as this printer comes back online, we should be able to see that the tag has been applied. And we can see that it has. This printer now has the tag print.tone equals to 4. And so the next thing I'm going to demonstrate is that if we change this printer settings to no longer match the auto tagging, once we kick it off the network and when it comes back on, the auto tagging should see this printer no longer meets the criteria, and that should be removed. And so this takes quite a while for it to come back on. I will forward it to when it does. So our printer is back online, and we should be able to see that there is no tag applied, and we see that that is the case. So that is auto tag and auto remove for you. And that is it for kind of the basic features. So now we're getting into the more complicated stuff. So one of the major features of this release is the ability for PPME to automatically manage a printer's wireless certificates. So for customers that have a lot of printers, they also have printers that connect to their wireless network. And instead of using, say, username and password like you might with a phone or something, they use certificates to join the network. The problem with that is certificates expire eventually if you're being secure about it. And especially as you get more printers, updating those certificates becomes very difficult. Think about the case if you're updating 10 certificates on 10 printers, not so bad. If you want to update the certificates on 1,000 printers, you need an automated solution to do that. So that's kind of the problem that we're trying to solve. So how does this feature work? As I will demonstrate, by connecting a customer, usually a customer's existing certificate authority, it would be the CA that they already use to sign their wireless certificates. We have the ability to connect to that certificate authority. So by using that and by using the firmware feature of CSR generation, PPME will be able to acquire new certificates for those printers. And not only that, by combining all of the previous features of PPME like tags and provisioning, we can make sure that as printers' expiration dates, as their certificate expirations are coming up, PPME can see that and request new certificates from their CA before they expire. And I will demonstrate that as well. But I realize that can be a little bit hard to picture, so I wanted to create a sequence diagram to show how this process occurs. How do we get a new certificate on the printer? So imagine that in our setup, I will show an automated setup, but imagine that a printer is coming up for expiration, PPME sees that, and it will kick off this sequence. So what happens is that Profile Manager will issue a generate CSR command to the printer. This printer will then generate the CSR, and it will leave its private key on the printer for security purposes. Once that's ready to go, the printer will notify PPME that the CSR is ready, which we can pull off of the printer and send directly to the certificate authority. At this point, the CSR is just like any other CSR you send to a CSR or to a CA. It has to be approved or denied. We generally recommend that you have a CA configuration for auto approving, but we realize that might not always be possible with different customers. So PPME also has the ability to pull for the certificate status on a long period of time until that certificate is either approved or denied. So imagining that the certificate request has been approved and PPME sees that, it can then retrieve the signed certificate from the certificate authority and place that on the printer. And once it does that, once the certificate is placed on the printer, the printer is told to restart. And once the printer comes back online, it has its new certificate, and hopefully the network is happy with that certificate. And so I believe this is the final demo that I have lined up, but this is a pretty important one. So you'll see that this certificates menu up above here is brand new for 3.1. This encapsulates all the functionality that we need for automated certificate management. So this doesn't control any of the printer connection stuff or the UI connection stuff. This is all wireless certificate management. So what I will show is that we can configure a connection to a customer certificate authority. We support several different types, but I'm going to show probably the most basic type, one that most customers will have, which is a Microsoft CA. And yeah, for the purposes of a demo, I just wanted to use probably the most basic configuration here. So after we enter in our authorization credentials, when we click save, the connection to the CA is tested and everything is checked to make sure we actually do have a legitimate configuration here, which we do. So we know our certificate authority, we know we can talk to that. The next thing to do is configure a certificate management item. And so what the certificate management item does is it basically tells the printer how and when to create a CSR for us. And so we need to tell it where the server lives, which is the one we just configured. We can select a message digest. We can select an encryption algorithm. You'll see there are a lot of good options there. And also, very importantly, we give it a threshold of days before expiring. So that's important to consider when it comes to the automated solution. So I'll just give it a certificate expiration time of 15 days. And we need to enter in some more certificate details because once again, these certificates are different from the SHA-2 certificates we use for the printers and the UI, mostly because those certificates are self-signed and generated, whereas these certificates are actually signed by a certificate authority. And so we'll just give this a name and a description and it should be ready to go. And at this point, I'm going to show what it would take to set up something automated. And so this setup involves combining the ability to tag printers and create a provisioning item to constantly check for the expiration. So you can see here some of the previous types of provisioning items you could create before 3.1 were sending a profile or sending resources to a printer on a timed task basis. The printer certificates is new for 3.1. So what this will allow us to do is set our configuration as a scheduled task. We can tell it which tag to apply these actions to. And as you can see, provisioning gives us a lot of options for scheduling this task. And so what this means is whatever times we schedule our task for, when this task is triggered, the CMI that we've configured here, it will be checked for that expiration threshold. And if the printer certificate is within that expiration threshold, then it will kick off that whole process from the sequence diagram that I showed off before. Simple, right? So what I'm going to show is what happens if we detect that a certificate is expiring. I'm just going to manually apply the CMI, and you can always do this manually too. So what this is going to do is just tell the printer to generate the CSR and kick off that whole process. A lot of times it may take a minute. For this demo, it kicked off immediately. So you can see where I expand the op log here, we can see what happened. And so reading from bottom to top, we can see the order of operations. We generated a CSR on the printer. We retrieved the CSR, and part of the retrieving CSR task is actually sending and retrieving from the CA, so you don't see that. Or descending at least. So we retrieved the signed certificate, and we store it on the printer, and we reset the network. So everything from that, that sequence diagram that I showed just took place within a matter of a few seconds. So as we wait for that printer to come back online, we can see what our wireless expiration date was before, which was in a day, I believe. And so the life of these certificates is, these are only test certificates, so it's very short. We want to see that this date and time has been updated. And when we reload the page, we should see that this printer has received a new certificate. So our UI is not updated yet until we reload the page. I wanted to show off the certificate timing. But when the page is reloaded, we should have our new information. We have our warning about expiring certificate. Oh boy, because it still expires in 1 day. Sorry about this. Let's get to the end here. So what we want to see is that that time frame on that certificate has been updated. And by reloading the page, we can see that at least the time had been updated. Obviously, it's not too far into the future because I had been doing this demo quite a few times, but we see that we did in fact receive our new certificate. And so that's about it as far as the automated certificate management goes. And so really the last feature that I wanted to mention is that for the first time, PPME now supports card printers. So until now, it's been only label printers that have been considered Link-OS printers. No card printers have been supported. So starting with the ZC100/300 models, these are now considered Link-OS firmware printers, and they have the full support of PPME. So you see on the right here, this is what the UI would look like for a connected card printer. Some of the things that are unique to the card printer would be the ribbon type here, and the images remaining kind of tells you how many cards you have left. So those things would be unique to the card printer. Aside from that, any of the features I've just discussed would be supported on these printers. And so aside from that, that's pretty much all I had. I think I'm ready for questions.
All right, we got several questions in here. Let's start with this one. I noticed recently that some Link OS 6 printers have been failing to authenticate to our visibility agent server due to the date being set wrong on the printer. They are still authenticating to PPME though. Will a change be made to PPME soon where improper date on the printer will also cause authentication failure? What's the best way to ensure printers have the correct date?
So we also do have an option in the configuration menu of PPME to set UTC time on the printers. And this is actually another new feature that I guess I kind of overlooked, because setting UTC time on the printer or ensuring that the printer has the correct time is actually very important for the functionality of certificates. So I would actually investigate that feature. It should be in the configuration menu of PPME if you have access to that. You can select to force UTC time on your printers. That means, I believe, every time the printer connects, PPME ensures that the printer will have the correct time and should ensure that all your printers are kind of synced up as far as time goes.
Okay. Setup Wizard. Is it used for existing customer upgrades?
That's actually a good question. I'm not exactly sure about that. When it comes to development, we haven't done, I haven't worked on the upgrade path too much. I would have to say likely not, but that would be something I could look into.
Okay, and any option for Setup Wizard if customer does not allow port 80 or 443 to be open?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I went through in the Setup Wizard there. If a customer has those ports blocked, which is something that you know, that's something that we have in our setup documentation. That's pretty important for you to have at least those two ports open. We've added the feature to be able to configure the proxy there, so you should be able to get around that stuff if you use a proxy server. But the general recommendation is 80 and 443 are very important ports for communication. Obviously, we do recommend that you have those open.
Okay. Will existing printer tags and settings carry over an upgrade? on an upgrade?
Yeah, for upgrade path, all settings should be maintained. If not, then there's something wrong there. So that's something we've tested pretty extensively is our upgrade path. All settings should be maintained.
Can you auto tag based on serial number?
Yes, because the serial number is actually contained in an SGD value. I'm not exactly sure what that SGD value where you would retrieve the serial number is, but what you would do is basically set the auto tagging configuration to look for the serial number SGD.
All right. And what are customers doing for reporting?
I'm sorry, for reporting?
Yes, reporting.
So we have several features that already existed in PPME. We do some data gathering if the customer does want that enabled. I believe it exports to CSV if you want, but we do have that feature enabled in the configuration menu. So if you have that enabled, PPME will gather some statistics about your printers and basically the application for if you want to use that data for reporting.
Okay. So those are all the questions we had. DevTalk community, do you have any more that you want to ask since we have Chris here?
And if anybody thinks of any questions afterwards, you can always email me. My email is ckenley@zebra.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might think of after the presentation.
So we did have one more request question come in. Can you show us how to export that data to CSV?
Oh boy.
That might be a follow-up email.
Yeah, I could
Okay.
definitely, if someone is interested in that, I would suggest that they contact me outside the presentation and I can put something together. It's not exactly something I was prepared to do.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for questions. Chris, thanks for doing it today. It was a good presentation.
Okay,
Thank you. All right,
great.
DevTalk
Thank you for
community.
having me
Thank you. Stay tuned. It'll be a few days. We'll look to get the deck out to everyone and also the recording posted. And thanks for coming, everyone. Have a good one.